Something massive has just detonated at the heart of Westminster. Keir Starmer's leadership is crumbling before the public's eyes, and what started as whispers behind closed doors has now exploded into full-blown parliamentary chaos. Moments ago, Starmer was hit with the biggest political blow of his entire career, a humiliating U-turn so catastrophic that even his most loyal allies are abandoning ship. The Labour Party is not just fractured, it is melting down in real time as resignations, leaks and public fury erupt across the nation. And at the centre of this historic implosion stands Angela Rayner, who has just walked away from Starmer's government, triggering shockwaves across the political landscape and signalling what may be the beginning of the end for Labour's fragile grip on power. As her resignation letter is dissected word by word, insiders say her departure wasn't just personal. It was a final warning to Starmer that his leadership has lost its moral compass, its credibility, and now its future. And as Rayner exits the stage, another figure is stepping into the spotlight, and Nigel Farage, whose sharp words and growing influence are rallying angry voters across the country as a political revolt brews that threatens to remake British politics as we know it. The downfall started with a decision so controversial that even Starmer's inner circle couldn't agree on how to defend it, in what was meant to be a cornerstone of Labour's governing agenda. A sweeping legislative reform expanding surveillance powers under the guise of modernisation. Starmer had hoped to project strength, discipline and control. But what he got instead was absolute revolt. Public outrage exploded almost immediately, with civil liberties groups, political commentators and voters across the spectrum denouncing the proposal as authoritarian and dangerous. Protesters took to the streets in dozens of cities, accusing the Labour government of betrayal and demanding the bill be scrapped. As the backlash intensified, so did the internal divisions. Senior cabinet members began leaking memos warning that the policy would ignite a firestorm Labour was unprepared to contain. One minister, speaking anonymously to The Times, warned, "This is political suicide. We're handing the opposition every weapon they need." And he was right. The Tories seized on the moment like vultures circling a wounded animal, branding Starmer a threat to British freedoms, and Nigel Farage, with his instinct for political timing, took to the airwaves, calling the policy a disgrace and labelling Labour the party of fear and control. His words struck a chord. Public support for the policy collapsed, and soon after, so did Starmer's resolve. Within hours of new polling showing a staggering 20-point swing in voter disapproval, Downing Street began drafting a quiet reversal, hoping no one would notice. But the damage was already done. Parliament was in uproar. The Prime Minister's U-turn, leaked before it could be formally announced, was met with jeers, accusations of cowardice, and demands for resignations. But the real earthquake came not from the opposition, but from within. Angela Rayner, once the party's deputy and seen by many as Starmer's strongest political counterbalance, had reportedly been sidelined during the entire planning process. For months, she had grown increasingly frustrated with Starmer's refusal to listen to internal warnings and his obsession with controlling the party's public image at the expense of its principles. According to multiple insiders, Rayner had begged Starmer to drop the proposal, arguing that it betrayed Labour's foundational promises to protect civil rights and uphold transparency. When he ignored her, again, she made a decision that would send Parliament into chaos. Her resignation letter, described by aides as blistering and unapologetic, was delivered this morning just before Prime Minister's questions, catching the entire front bench off guard. In it, she accused Starmer of abandoning the very voters who put Labour in power and warned that his failure to lead with conviction was dragging the party toward destruction. The timing could not have been more devastating. As the Prime Minister prepared to face a hostile chamber, news of Rayner's resignation swept through Westminster like wildfire, triggering panic among Labour MPs and jubilation on the opposition benches. What followed was nothing short of a parliamentary meltdown. During Starmer's appearance in the Commons, opposition MPs lined up to tear into his record, waving copies of Rayner's letter and quoting her words back to him in real time. One Conservative MP shouted across the aisle, "Even your own deputy won't stand by you. Why should the country?" The chamber erupted in uproar. Meanwhile, on social media, the fallout spread at lightning speed. Hashtags like hashtag Starmer must go and hashtag Rayner resigns began trending within minutes as furious voters shared footage of protests, leaked cabinet messages, and Farage's fiery response in Parliament Square, where he declared, "Labour's collapse is the final proof that this country needs new leadership, honest, fearless leadership. Leadership that listens to the people, not spies on them." His rally drew hundreds in under an hour and sent a clear message. The political vacuum left by Starmer's weakness was already being filled. Within the Labour ranks, unity was shattered. Several backbenchers began openly calling for a leadership challenge, while loyalists clashed in emergency meetings behind locked doors. MPs were seen leaving meetings in tears, others refusing to speak to reporters at all. The government, in less than 24 hours, had gone from controlling the narrative to barely holding on to its own ministers. As one Labour strategist confided to the BBC, "This is no longer about damage control, this is survival mode. The Prime Minister's authority is gone, we're just waiting to see who makes the next move." With Angela Rayner gone, Nigel Farage rising, and Parliament in open revolt, Keir Starmer stands alone, weakened, exposed, and increasingly irrelevant to the very system he thought he could command. And this is just the beginning. The resignation of Angela Rayner was not an isolated act of defiance. It was a signal flare to the rest of the Labour Party that the era of silent loyalty was over. Within hours of her departure, the internal floodgates burst open. Ministers who had once nodded obediently behind Starmer began to retreat into silence, while others, emboldened by Rayner's move, took their gloves off entirely. Leaked WhatsApp chats revealed cabinet ministers exchanging panicked messages, some openly questioning whether Starmer could survive the week. One chilling message read simply, "Brace yourselves, the floor is about to fall in." And fall it did. As Parliament resumed its afternoon session, what was supposed to be a routine debate turned into a full-blown political ambush. Labour MPs, once seated tightly behind their leader, were now scattered across the benches, visibly divided, whispering, avoiding eye contact, or not showing up at all. Starmer's attempts to defend his leadership rang hollow, every sentence interrupted by shouts of "resign" or "you've lost the room." The opposition, sensing blood in the water, went in for the kill. Tory backbenchers reading aloud from Angela Rayner's resignation letter, each word delivered like a dagger to the Prime Minister's image of authority. It wasn't just a bad day for Starmer, it was the worst day of his premiership. Outside the chamber, a storm of media cameras and reporters gathered as whispers of further resignations began circulating. According to Sky News, at least 3 junior ministers had already submitted private letters of no confidence, while several prominent MPs refused to deny rumours of a leadership challenge being drafted behind the scenes. Political journalists, many of whom had once described Starmer as the sober, steady hand after the chaos of previous administrations, now openly speculated on live television whether he would even make it to the next party conference. "We are watching a government unravel in slow motion," said one analyst grimly, and that unravelling was happening everywhere. In the press, in the polls, in the streets. New data released by YouGov showed Labour's approval rating falling 12 points in just 48 hours, with trust in Starmer's leadership collapsing among swing voters. Among traditional Labour strongholds, the reaction was even worse. Councillors and local officials began issuing joint statements distancing themselves from the surveillance plan, demanding answers, and in some cases calling on Starmer to step aside for the good of the party and the country. Meanwhile, Farage was seizing the moment with masterful precision. He wasn't just responding, he was leading the charge. In fiery town halls, with spoils and spontaneous rallies, Farage declared that the Labour government's authoritarian instincts had finally been exposed. His messaging was simple and relentless. They promised change. They delivered control. That phrase was repeated in every clip, every headline, every tweet. He positioned himself not just as an opposition figure, but as a populist alternative, a man of the people against a crumbling establishment. The footage of him speaking in Birmingham that evening, flanked by voters holding signs that read "Resign Starmer" and "Freedom over Fear," was broadcast across every major network. Analysts, even those previously dismissive of Farage, admitted that he had tapped into something raw, Something powerful, a sense that the political class had once again underestimated the mood of the nation. He's not just capitalising on a crisis, one commentator noted. He's rewriting the narrative in real time, and the public is listening. Inside Labour headquarters, the mood turned from desperate to poisonous. Staffers leaked emails showing frantic attempts to rewrite the Prime Minister's statements, delete earlier social media posts in support of the now abandoned policy, and schedule last-minute media appearances to spin the disaster as a strategic adjustment. But no one was buying it. Reporters were already digging deeper, publishing stories revealing that the surveillance policy had been in development for over a year and that concerns had been raised internally from the beginnings. Worse still, senior figures in Labour's communications team were caught coordinating efforts to suppress dissenting voices within the party, trying to prevent MPs from publicly criticising the proposal. The exposure of that internal censorship only confirmed what critics had feared all along: that the Labour leadership was more concerned with controlling the narrative than addressing the truth. And the truth was devastating. They had lost control of the policy, of the party, of the country. In a shocking twist, several Labour MPs began holding unsanctioned press briefings outside Westminster, defying party orders and speaking openly about their disillusionment. One MP, visibly shaken, told reporters, "We were promised a government of integrity. What we got was a government of fear." Another, asked whether Starmer still had their support, simply replied, "Not anymore." These moments, captured on live television, fed into the growing perception that Starmer's leadership was no longer salvageable. The whispers of rebellion had become roars. And as Angela Rayner remained silent, refusing to speak further to the press, speculation grew that her resignation was not a retreat, but a calculated first move. Several insiders confirmed that Rayner had held private meetings with donors and party organisers in the weeks leading up to her departure, discussing alternative visions for the party's future. The word on everyone's lips: challenge. Could Rayner be preparing a leadership bid? Could she become the next face of Labour in a post-Starmer era? No one knew for certain, but one thing was undeniable: she had the momentum, the message, and now the moral high ground. By nightfall, Parliament was in open revolt. The Speaker was forced to call multiple emergency sessions to restore order, while the Labour Whip's office worked overtime to prevent a mass walkout. But the damage was far beyond containment. Party elders were reportedly reaching out to Starmer privately, urging him to consider stepping back gracefully before the situation deteriorated further. But insiders say Starmer refused, insisting that the crisis was manageable and blaming media hysteria for the backlash. That stubbornness, according to sources, only intensified the fury among his colleagues. "He's not listening," said one cabinet member. "He's not even seeing the writing on the wall." And the writing was now flashing in bold red across the nation's screens. Labour is collapsing, and unless something changes fast, Starmer may not be leading it for much longer. What had started as internal fractures were now visible fault lines ripping straight through the centre of Labour's power structure. News outlets led with one headline: "Starmer surrounded." The resignation of Angela Rayner, once dismissed by Downing Street as unfortunate but manageable costs, had triggered a domino effect no one in Labour HQ could contain. Reports from within the cabinet confirmed that at least 2 senior ministers were preparing to resign in solidarity, citing Starmer's disconnected leadership and the surveillance U-turn as the final betrayal. Their statements were being quietly drafted by aides, and leaked snippets reached the press within hours. But it wasn't just ministers considering the exits. Labour MPs across the country were being contacted by furious constituents, some threatening to resign from the party altogether if Starmer remained in charge. Local party chairs called emergency meetings. Donors pulled scheduled contributions. Constituency offices were overwhelmed with phone calls demanding answers. The country was watching, and they weren't just angry, they were done. And while Starmer's team scrambled to hold the line, Nigel Farage was moving full speed ahead. With every passing hour, his support base grew stronger. Not just in numbers, but in purpose. His condemnation of the Labour U-turn had gone viral overnight, shared by millions across social media. Commentators described it as one of the most effective political attacks in modern UK history. "We are being ruled by cowards and careerists," Farage declared in one clip. "They don't serve the people, they serve their own polling data. And when they're caught, they lie," his words cut through like a blade. Talk radio lines were jammed with callers quoting him verbatim. One woman from Manchester said, "For the first time in years, Bays, someone's actually speaking the truth." Farage capitalised on the moment, announcing a nationwide campaign against Labour's leadership. Not just the surveillance bill, but the entire agenda it represented. His slogan was simple: Britain first, always. Within 24 hours, his first 3 campaign stops were filled to capacity. Analysts began asking the unthinkable: could Farage, long dismissed as a fringe agitator, now be poised to reshape the entire opposition? Inside Labour, the panic reached fever pitch. A secret late-night strategy meeting among Starmer's remaining loyalists reportedly devolved into bitter arguments and shouting matches. One MP stormed out, slamming the door behind them and yelling, "We're running out of time!" According to sources in attendance, the meeting focused not on repairing trust with the public, but on blocking a leadership challenge. Multiple contingency plans were drafted, including reshuffling the cabinet, suspending dissenting MPs, and launching a positive Labour Future PR campaign to distract from the implosion. But none of it worked. Every leak, every quote, every backroom scheme was exposed within minutes by the press. The government was bleeding credibility faster than it could patch the wounds. One senior Labour staffer told The Guardian, "We're being eaten alive from within. Everyone's terrified and no one knows who to trust." The sense of collapse wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was happening in real time, out in the open, for all to see. At Prime Minister's questions later that day, the chamber was electric with tension. Starmer entered to a wave of whispers and side eyes, his own MPs barely acknowledging him. On the opposition benches, Farage watched with steely focus. He had secured a rare public observer's spot, invited by a sympathetic Tory MP, a move both symbolic and strategic. When Starmer attempted to defend his recent U-turn, the response was immediate and brutal. Conservative MPs erupted with laughter. One shouted, "You couldn't lead a parade, let alone a government." Others jeered, "Where's Angela? And who's next to quit?" The Speaker struggled to maintain order as Labour's benches sat silent, motionless and broken. Not a single MP rose to applaud Starmer. Not one word of support was shouted. He stood entirely alone. And then came the most damning moment yet. An explosive leak from within Starmer's own policy unit. A confidential document labelled Operation Integrity revealed that senior Labour officials had known for months that the surveillance policy would trigger widespread backlash, but chose to suppress dissent within the party and push ahead anyway. Worse, the document included polling projections showing that the party expected to lose key marginal seats, and continued anyway out of fear of appearing weak. The media pounced, headlines blared, they knew and lied. That single revelation shattered what little faith the public still had. Voters realised that the chaos wasn't an accident. It was planned. It was political arrogance disguised as reform. And the consequences were immediate. As the dust settles, or tries to, Westminster is gripped by a silence more ominous than the chaos that preceded it. Inside Labour HQ, the phones ring unanswered. Inboxes fill with resignation threats, and senior figures are nowhere to be seen. Starmer, once the face of cautious leadership, is now the symbol of everything the public despises: indecision, betrayal and collapse. His attempts to project control have failed so utterly that even the loyal few left around him are preparing exit routes. Angela Rayner remains silent, but her influence grows by the hour. Leaks suggest she's already drafted a leadership plan with key allies, backing her to restore Labour's soul. The coup has not been declared, but it's already begun. And as MPs prepare for a possible emergency vote of no confidence, Starmer's fate may now lie entirely in their hands. Outside Westminster, Nigel Farage's voice dominates the national stage. No longer an outsider, he is now shaping the crisis from the front. His rallies are growing, his message is clear, and his rise is no longer a sideshow. It is a threat. A new poll shows more than half the country now believes Labour has lost control, while Farage's approval among working-class voters surges to unprecedented highs. The political order is being rewritten in real time, and through it all, the people watch, angry, betrayed and ready to act. Starmer's premiership is hanging by a thread, Labour is imploding, and Britain stands on the brink of a historic shift. The question now is not whether the government survives, but what rises from its ashes. One thing is certain, the chaos isn't over. It's only just begun.